Thank you. Good evening, students. Very good evening. Lot of students you could see after quite some long break, we are meeting again. So good. How was your studies in the interim? I expect a lot of questions to be asked by students who have attended and who have actually read. So by the questions what you asked today, I will get to know how much of your studies you have done in the past so that you could cover up all the questions till exemptions. Exemption notes, it has not come. I think I've uploaded it. Uh, uh, I think I have updated it. Okay, if it is not updated, I'll update it today so that it will reach out to you so that you could get on to the questions. Okay. No, sir, notes is not uploaded. Okay. So if it is not uploaded, I will ensure that it gets updated by tomorrow so that next class on Saturday, I'll get an update from you. If it is, you can see it. I will send it today itself on the exemption chapter. Okay. Petladwala, you have seen the updated ones. Few students are saying it's not updated. Okay, there's a confusion. Anyways, I'll update it today again so that you could see it for your reference. Okay, so not much of, okay, one student is asking question, chapter number 4, test your knowledge, question number 8. Okay, Alok Singhi will go to that question first. So there's a question because time of supply before entering into this, let us take up few questions of students. Chapter number 4. Question number 8. Question number 8, Alok, it is a state transport undertaking has hired motor vehicles meant to carry 8 to 10 passengers from Fast Cab Renting, which is a motor vehicle renting company. Give your comments as to whether any GST is payable in this case. So it's a state transport undertaking which has hired motor vehicles which is meant to carry 8 to 10 passengers from Fast Car Renting. So who is the service provider? Fast Car Renting is a service provider. It's a motor vehicle renting company. It is providing service to a state transport undertaking. Give your comments as to whether GST is payable on this. So what do you think? What is your answer in this? Is there any confusion here? Services by way of giving on hire to a state transport undertaking, a motor vehicle meant to carry more than 12 passengers exempt from GST. So there is an exemption notification which says that if there is any renting to a state transport undertaking of a motor vehicle which is meant to carry more than 12 passengers is exempted. Since in this case it is meant to carry a cab which is of 8 to 10 passengers, it will not be eligible for exemption and it will be liable to GST. Okay. Yes, Priyanka, what is your question? Please ask. I started about 5 days back. I'm catching up on covered session. I am from engineering background systems. Okay. Okay, good. Yes, Priyanka, you can ask now so that we could. स्लाइड शो नहीं हो रहा है. स्लाइड शो हमने शुरू नहीं किया है. हम अभी क्वेश्चंस ले रहे हैं कि पिछले क्लासेस का कुछ क्वेश्चन हो तो हम 1 और 5 मिनट वेट करेंगे ताकि पिछले क्लासेस का जो भी क्वेश्चंस हो वो हम कवर अप कर सके. Being a CA and CS, what do you think is more challenging and interesting? Definitely, it is CA. CA is more challenging in terms of writing the exams, but when it comes to practice, Priyanka, I think both has its pros and cons. Even CS is equally challenging. The nature of work is different. In CA, you deal lot of things with numbers, deal with lot of taxation laws. You deal with GST and income tax. So even in CA, you'll have to particularly decide what is your area of interest. So today's world, it is not about being a general practitioner. You'll have to specialize in one of these things. So once you have studied everything in your exam, so you know all of the papers. That's the reason all the papers are exposed to you at this exam level so that you know what is the taste of each of these subjects. Then you know which is the one which your interest lies in. It is not always that subject in which you get your highest marks. That's your favorite subject, not necessary. Theoretical questions might be different from practical things. Do you really like the subject? It could be that a cost accounting also could be an interesting subject for few. So then they should pursue CWA and pursue on that. Or some people might find interest in this topic of GST. So then you should specialize in GST and practice in this. So it depends on which area of practice is it. And for me, personally, I have interest in CA work more because there is some kind of interpretation involved, some kind of something happening within this field. So GST is of my interest, so I'm taking this. Direct tax, people who follow, there's a lot of things in that also. So there's a lot of interesting things there also. So that also could be practiced. A person who is into legal company law matters, who really likes what the Companies Act, then he should follow the CS and he should follow his career as a company secretary. Okay, Priyanka. How much of studies do you due to lot of too much of studies, but you have to manage between your studies and your articleship. You have a dedicated time for your studies so that you don't get deviated. So chapter number 5, question number 15 समझा दो in Hindi. 15वां क्वेश्चन क्या पूछ रहा है? 15वां क्वेश्चन पूछ रहा है ST Limited has given on hire 5 trucks to T2 transporters. ये तो हमने कवर किया है. ST Limited has given on hire 5 trucks to T2 transporters of Delhi. तो एक कंपनी है जिसने 5 ट्रक भाड़े पे दिया है, हायर पे दिया, भाड़े पे दिया है टू T2 transporters of Delhi, who is a goods transport agency. So जिसको रिसीव हो रहा है वो कौन है? Goods transport agency है. किसके लिए? For transporting goods in Central and West Delhi. The hiring charges for the trucks are 7,500 rupees per day. Examine whether GST is payable in the given case. तो इस केस पे GST लगेगा या नहीं? GST आंसर ये देता है कि GST नहीं लगेगा क्योंकि हायरिंग आप ट्रक्स करते हो, किसको हायर करते हो? GTA को. ओके, टू T2 ट्रांसपोर्टर्स एंड सर्विसेज बाय गिविंग ऑन हायर टू अ गुड्स ट्रांसपोर्ट एजेंसी. अगर आप भी या कोई भी इंडिविजुअल या कोई भी कंपनी गुड्स ट्रांसपोर्ट एजेंसी को भाड़े पे, हायर पे ट्रक्स देते हैं तो वो एग्जेम्पशन रहेगा. तो इसीलिए हमने देखा कि जो हायर देते हैं T2 ट्रांसपोर्टर्स को वो एग्जेम्पशन रहता है. ठीक है. How to remember all exemptions? Exemptions आपको पूरा thoroughly पढ़ना चाहिए. Once you understand the exemption, once read it, understand it, then you try to correlate those exemptions. So like how I bundled it. ऐसा कुछ आपको charts prepare करना पड़ेगा कि these are the exemptions through which all the bundled services are good together. So once it is bundled, you're not reading the individual thing. You will have to read the bundled all exemptions together. That becomes easier for you. Okay. Swati, considering your situation that you are attending both morning and even, so if you're planning to write in May 2023, I would say you have sufficient time now, but you have other commitments. So then I would recommend you to write one group at a time, concentrate completely on that, and then do the other group. But it'll take a longer period of time. If you're able to complete your studies, say by January, you can gauge through saying that how much have you studied. As of now, you concentrate on one group. So if you are able to concentrate and complete that group in 3 months, then you should go for the second group also. But if you're feeling that within 3 months, your pace is not picking up, hardly 3 months now, we are already in the mid of November, December, and January. By January, you will get to know what is the progress, how many chapters or how many subjects you have covered. If you're still unable to cover, then I would suggest to take up one group. Okay. If you're going for both the groups at the time, how much we allocate the subjects? One day, how many hours subject we should study? So you should only take the number of hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep, okay, 6 to 7 hours maximum. Then some food time and things like that, another 3 hours, 10 hours of your things, and balance of your 14 hours you have to spend for study. Okay, it is very tough to imagine it, but practically, if you are involved in the subject, it becomes easier. So if you are getting involved into the subject, then even 14 hours will be felt less. I've known people who have spent more than these hours also, but for average 12 to 14 hours should be good enough for your preparation. If it's a dedicated studies and not getting deviated with lot of deviations like mobiles and laptops, throw up all of these things, concentrate on your books, then you'll be able to achieve it. आपके जैसे फ्लो चार्ट कैसे प्रिपेयर करें, जैसे मैंने प्रिपेयर किया है वैसे ही आप बुक उठाइए, अपने हिसाब से पढ़िए. सो वंस यू प्रिपेयर योर फ्लो चार्ट, आपको अपने तरफ से भी याद होगा कि हाँ मैंने बनाया है, और एग्जाम में भी आपको जल्दी याद होगा इफ यू प्रिपेयर इट बाय योर ओन. मेरे फ्लो चार्ट लेके आप सिर्फ कॉपी करोगे देन इट विल स्टे, लेकिन आप अपने आप से खुद से ही बनाओगे तो और ज्यादा टिकेगा. ठीक है. Being a student, can I attend World Congress of Accountants? I'm not very sure, Priyanka. उसको आपको देखना पड़ेगा whether it's permitted. I think it should be permitted. In Senvat and VAT, how was double taxation on goods and services? Abhishek Pandey, हमने देखा है कि Senvat में how there was double taxation. In Senvat scheme, the input tax credit was not available for supply. Okay, so the input tax credit what was available only to a manufacturer, right? Like the customs duty, when goods used to get cleared, they used to charge excise duty. This excise duty was not credit which was available to any person other than a manufacturer. So on that, tax was again charged. So that was the example of Senvat, double taxation on Senvat. Then in software cases, on goods portion also, VAT was charged, and on the service portion, service tax was charged. So in Senvat and VAT, we've seen examples of construction companies or software companies on the same base value, VAT and service tax both were charged. That's when we will say that double taxation was there on goods and services. ओके, पंचाल नरेश भाई, एग्जामिशन में प्रॉपरली अंडरस्टैंड नहीं हो रहा, आप फिर से रिकॉर्डिंग सुनिए और जो भी क्वेरीज है पर्टिकुलरली आप पूछें, सो दैट इन नेक्स्ट क्लास आल्सो आई कैन टेक इट अप. Vindyanbu, whether you use ink pen or ball pen, anything is fine. No restriction on that. You can use whichever you're comfortable with. There should be a separate paper for rough, or we could do the workings in the answer sheet. You could do it in answer sheet, whichever is relevant workings, you could do it, or you could write it in the end of the page and just strike it off. That is also fine. अगर आपको relevant workings है which you have to explain it to the examiner, then you could mention it over there itself. Nikita, if you have not attended the classes, तो आप previous recordings देख सकते हैं. Based on that, you could take it up. What is the benefit if we completed both the groups? कल पूछ सकते हो. हाँ, कल सैटरडे मेरा क्लास है पंचाल, so that time आप पूछ सकते हो. If you complete both the groups in one attempt, आपको जल्दी खत्म होगा. अगर आपको and you'll get the benefit of carry over of 1 marks अगर of subjects of 1 अगर आप साथ में लिखते हो और एक ग्रुप में मार्क्स कम है और आपको एवरेज आउट करना है, तो both of them it gets moved up. ठीक है, तो आपको जो 50% मार्क्स यहाँ पे चाहिए और यहाँ पे 45 आ गया और एक और ग्रुप में 55 आ गया, तो देन दोनों मैच करके आपको मिल जाएगा. दैट्स द बिगेस्ट एडवांटेज ऑफ राइटिंग बोथ द ग्रुप्स टुगेदर. Is this all chapter related to theory? It is theory plus practical. We have taken some practical questions in the previous class. वैसे आपको practical आ सकते हैं. Okay, so let's start. With this topic of time of supply. Okay, तो हमने देखा कि various what is supply, when is it supply, is it taxable, not taxable, is it exempted. Now we'll get into the time of supply. Time of supply of goods, then time of supply of services. It includes reverse charge, forward charge, vouchers exchangeable for goods, and residual cases. Okay, so what we will understand in this chapter in today's class is time of supply, which is time of supply for goods is separate, time of supply for services is separate. Okay, for goods we have time of supply for goods, क्योंकि goods are tangible goods, tangible things which can be seen. So time of supply for goods is separate, time of supply for services is separate. Now, why is this time of supply is relevant? Because you have to discharge your GST, correct? And there are various things which is getting involved in a transaction. Like I might raise a purchase order. Once I raise a purchase order, the supplier sells to me. He sells it to me, then I get delivery late. Then he will bill it to me either before or afterwards, and I may pay him advance or I may pay him after I get the invoice, after I get testing done, after I use it. So there are various points involved in a transaction. So to have uniformity, this time of supply is given here. So we have time of supply for goods and time of supply for services separately. Okay, services, there will not be any delivery, there will not be any movement of goods. So there is difference between goods and services. Services involves things which are intangible. That's the reason the rules for time of supply for goods is separate and for services is separate. Okay. Then time of supply includes reverse charge. Okay. When is the time of supply for regular supply? When is the time of supply for reverse charge? That is also separate. Then there are some vouchers which is given. What is voucher? You go to a mall, you buy something and you gift to somebody so that they can take that voucher and redeem it. That's a coupon kind of a thing, which is exchangeable for goods or services. That is a voucher. Then in case of residual cases, what happens is also been discussed in this chapter. Okay. Okay, DT and IDT has separate supplementary in exams. Do we need to write both in the same? Not very sure, Pikladwala, on your question. All insurance business are exempt GST? No, all insurance business are not exempted. Only those government insurance schemes which has been mentioned, that is exempted. Okay. So supply consists of various elements, like how I was saying, there are various elements involved in a supply. First is issuance of purchase order. So big companies expect that before I raise a sale invoice, I have to get a purchase order so that the person who is intending to buy raise a purchase order. So he will raise a PO. Purchase order is famously called as PO. He will raise a purchase order saying that I want to purchase these goods at this price. Okay. Based on that, he will dispatch the goods. Okay. Once it dispatches the goods, then there is delivery of goods. Because once it dispatches, it will not reach to me on the same day. If it is from different states, then my delivery is different from the dispatch date. Then he will dispatch it with the invoice. It is possible that he dispatches the goods and he raises the invoice late. Sometimes that is also possible. Then entry in my records. When do I record it in my books of accounts? I may record it later on. I may accumulate few invoices and record it on a monthly basis or on a weekly basis. That is also possible. My payments. Next point is payments. I may pay him in advance. I may pay him after 30 days. I may pay him after 60 days. Or my entry for payment of books is different. I will make an entry, but the check I will deposit later on. So there are various elements, which is not one kind of a event which happens in case of supply. So there are various points involved to clarify all of this. Time of supply is there to determine at what point of time GST becomes payable. Because once we determine the time of supply, that is the time when it will be treated as a supply is completed for GST purposes. Then the return has to be filed based on this time of supply and the taxes has to be paid. Okay, that's the reason the time of supply carries some importance. Now, at what point of time GST becomes payable? Does it become payable when an agreement to supply of goods or services is made? Or is it when goods are actually shipped? Or is it when the invoice is issued? Or is it when the payment is made? Now, time of supply will give you an answer for all of these questions, saying that when it is the time to call it as an actual supply. Okay. Good evening, Sri Vatsan, Sri Parasara. So time of supply will decide, saying that these are the various points triggers in a transaction. Now, which point we have to select for our services is what will be called as time of supply. Now, if from various points, we get to know that this is the time of supply. Okay, one moment. So there are various trigger points, like how I had mentioned these trigger points. These are the trigger points which takes place in a transaction. So pictorially understand this to actually understand when time of supply triggers and what is its relevance. क्यों पढ़ रहे हो वो भी जानना चाहिए ना. तो टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई हमको बताता है कि एक ट्रांजैक्शन में आपके 3-4 इवेंट्स हैं और टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई डिसाइड करेगा कि ये आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई है. सपोज मेरे एग्जांपल में 3-4 इवेंट्स है और टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई प्रोविजन जो हम अभी पढ़ेंगे उससे डिसाइड हो गया कि ये जो पॉइंट है ये आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई है, विच इज 11 अप्रैल 2021 एग्जांपल के लिए आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई है. तो आप क्या टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ट्रिगर करते ही आप जीएसटी पे कर दोगे? तो इसका मतलब हर एक ट्रांजैक्शन का टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई जब आएगा आपको टैक्स भरना है, बट ऐसे नहीं होता है. यू हैव टू कीप इट लिटिल ऑर्गेनाइज्ड, राइट? तो इसलिए अगर आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई आ गया 11 अप्रैल को, तो आपको पूरे महीने के ट्रांजैक्शंस जिसका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई इस मंथ में इफेक्ट हुआ है, यू हैव टू अक्यूमुलेट देम, और आपको जब ड्यू डेट ऑफ रिटर्न फाइलिंग होगा तब आपको इसको डिस्क्लोज करेगा. और अप्रैल में जो भी ट्रांजैक्शंस हो गए उन सब के ट्रांजैक्शंस अक्यूमुलेट करके आप ड्यू डेट अप्रैल में आपने सेल किया है, अप्रैल में आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ट्रिगर हुआ है, तब आपका रिटर्न अप्रैल का नेक्स्ट मंथ 20th को फाइल करने को होगा. ठीक है, 11 अप्रैल को जब आपने परचेस या आपने सेल दिखा दिया या इनवॉइस रेज कर दिया, वो आप टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई डिसाइड करेगा कि क्या है आपको टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई. उस टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई से आपके नेक्स्ट मंथ में रिटर्न्स फाइल करना होगा. सो अप्रैल मंथ का रिटर्न्स मई में फाइल करते हैं, तो इसका टैक्स मैं 20th को जमा करूंगा. ठीक है, सो द टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई इट सेज व्हाट आर द वेरियस ट्रिगर पॉइंट्स and it will attract one of those points as the relevant time. From that time, you don't have to pay taxes immediately on a daily basis. You accumulate all the transactions for that month and pay the taxes in the subsequent month. Okay. Supply for goods or services is same or not. Supply for goods and services, time of supply for goods is different. Time of supply for services is different. Okay. Now, there are various important definitions which we need to understand before we get into the time of supply. Goods. We have already learned this definition of goods, but it is also relevant here. If there's any doubts there, to clarify here. What does goods means? Goods means all kinds of movable property. Firstly, the feature is it should be a movable thing. So goods means all kinds of movable property, and it includes, what does it include? Actionable claim. Actionable claim is a goods. Yes, actionable claims are goods. Growing crops, grass and things forming part of the land agreed to be severed before supply or under a contract of supply. Right. So if there is a contract of supply saying that along with the land, I am selling you this crops also, and it has been agreed that it will be severed. Okay, it will be taken off. Fruits का एक झाड़ है यहाँ पे, wherein I'm selling you a farmland with fruits, and it is agreed that fruits also will be sold. So even though it is attached to the land to make it as immovable property, but since it is agreed to be severed before supply or under a contract of supply, then the sale of fruits from the tree is also treated as a supply of goods. Okay, so growing crops, grass, and things which are forming part of the land agreed to be severed before. So itna hi aapko, it is clearly understandable ki any growing crops, grass, and things which are forming part of the land and have agreed to be severed will be a supply of goods, not supply of immovable property. Okay. Now, what does it exclude? It excludes money and securities, because transaction in money is excluded and transaction in securities are excluded, both from the definition of goods as well as from the definition of services. Okay, that is the definition of goods. Now, services means anything other than goods. Okay, service means anything other than goods, but it includes activities relating to use of money or its conversion for a consideration. Right? Money is excluded. यहाँ पर भी money and securities is excluded. Like in goods definition, money and services excluded. Also in definition of services, money and securities are excluded. Also, goods are excluded. Means anything what is goods. Anything other than goods becomes services. Services means anything but excluding goods, money, and securities, but including activities relating to use of money or its conversion for a consideration. Activities relating to use of money. Money is exempted, but any activity you do with the use of money is included into the definition of services, and it includes activities facilitating or arranging of transactions in securities. So money directly is excluded, but relating to the use of money or its conversion for a consideration becomes money. Then in case of securities, activities relating or arranging of transactions in securities. मतलब securities क्या होते हैं? Shares, equity, bonds, debentures, all of this is securities. So if I buy and sell any securities, there is no GST, but facilitating of these buying and transactions. Jesse, I cannot buy from the stock market directly. I have to have a demat account, go through a stockbroker. The stockbroker, what he does, he facilitates my buying in the securities. So those activities of the broker, can you say that since shares is not liable for not a service, not in the definition of service, so it's not liable to GST. So the activities in relation to the security is also excluded? No, you can't say that, because specifically it says that activities in relation to transaction or facilitating of these securities is included. So that will be included then. Okay. That is the definition of service. Clear, simple. Services means anything other than goods, money, and securities, but it includes activities relating to use of money or its conversion for a consideration, and activities facilitating or arranging transactions in securities. Okay. Then who is a recipient? Because we will see the importance of recipient in time of supply. Now, this recipient means if a consideration is payable for supply of goods or services, wherein I am doing a sale transaction for which I will get some money. Okay. So if consideration is payable for supply, most of the transactions will see there is a consideration. So if there is a consideration which is payable for the supply, then the person who is liable to pay the consideration becomes a recipient. Now I've sold goods to the head office. Okay. Head office says, don't deliver the goods to me, deliver to my branch office. So I've delivered to the branch. But supplier is the person who's liable to pay. Who's liable to pay? The head office, because they have the one who placed the order. So when the head office pays to me, he is the person who is liable to pay the consideration because I have a contract with the head office. So since head office is liable to pay the consideration, they will become the recipient, not the person to whom I deliver the goods. The recipient in this case is not dependent on the movement of goods. It is dependent on who is the person who is liable to pay the consideration where consideration is payable. In a transaction where the consideration is not payable, then what happens? Then the recipient is the person to whom goods are delivered or made available or to whom possession or use of the goods is given. Like in case of a sale or disposal transactions, wherein consideration is not involved. There, who is the recipient? Recipient is the person to whom the goods are actually delivered. If consideration is there, then the person who is liable to pay. If consideration is not there, the person to whom these goods are delivered. Then, if no consideration is payable for the supply of goods, also in that case, person to whom the service is rendered. So this was in case of no consideration for goods. Here it is no consideration payable for supply of services. In this case, the recipient is the person to whom the service is rendered. Okay, so in case of goods, the person to whom goods are delivered. In case of services, it's the person to whom services is rendered. Now, recipient can also be an agent acting on behalf of the recipient in relation to the goods or services supplied. So if there is an agent appointed by the principal and he says that you can deliver the goods to him, even if there is no consideration, then the goods, the recipient acting on behalf of the agent who's acting on behalf of the recipient will be treated as a recipient. Recipient includes an agent. So either the goods can be supplied to the principal or to his agent. Okay, but who will be liable? Who will be called as a recipient? The principal only. In case of an agent, when if he receives on behalf of the principal, it will be deemed that the recipient is the principal itself. Okay. So we understood the recipient where consideration is involved, the person who is liable to pay. If consideration is not involved, the person to whom goods are delivered. And in case of supplier of services, then the recipient is the person to whom the services is rendered. Person to whom the service is rendered. Okay. Now this recipient could be the principal or his agent, either of them. Now supplier in relation to any goods or services or both shall mean who. We have understood the definition of recipient. Now we'll understand the definition of supplier. Who is supplier? Supplier in relation to any goods or services or both shall mean the person who is supplying the said goods or services. Who is a supplier? Supplier is the person who is supplying. The person in relation to goods or services means a person who is supplying the said goods or services or both, and shall include an agent acting as such on behalf of the principal in relation to the goods or services are both supplied. So we'll break it up. We'll see that supplier in relation to any goods or services, because what are we talking under GST? We're talking of goods and services. So supplier will be in relation to any goods or services. He means the person who is supplying the goods or services. Okay, it means the person who is supplying the goods or services, and it includes an agent acting on behalf of such supplier in relation to the goods. Means in relation to these goods which have been supplied, if it has been supplied by the agent, then the agent will be treated as a supplier. Okay, so we understood what happens in case an agent is supplying, because we saw under Schedule 1 transactions, if there is a separate transaction between supplier and agent is doing this independently, then agent is separate, supplier is separate, but agent is doing on behalf of the supplier, then he will be under the shoes of the supplier itself. Okay. What is the definition of consideration? We have seen consideration means it could be a monetary consideration or a non-monetary consideration. Consideration means anything what we get in return for the supply, wherein there is a quid pro quo. Matlab, if I'm supplying something, I'm expecting something. That could be a definition of consideration. Of this consideration, not always is monetary. It could be in terms of money, or it could be in terms of non-monetary transactions. Like it could be that he's supplying something to me. Okay. Or he is obliged to do something for me. So the consideration, or he's giving something else instead of money, that is also a consideration. So recipient में no consideration का point clear नहीं हुआ. Consideration recipient में अगर कंसिडरेशन नहीं पे कर रहा है, मतलब जनरल ट्रांजैक्शन आप देखोगे, आप कुछ भी बेचते हो आप तो सामने वाला आपको रुपए देगा, लेकिन अगर कुछ ट्रांजैक्शन है जिसपे रिसीवर पेमेंट नहीं करेगा, जैसे मैंने डिस्पोज कर दिया एसेट्स, ठीक है, तो उसके लिए रिसिपेंट कौन कहा जाएगा? जो एक्चुअल गुड्स रिसीव कर रहा है उसे हम रिसिपेंट कहेंगे, ठीक है। सिमिलरली अगर मैं सर्विस सप्लाई कर रहा हूं तो पर्सन टू होम द सर्विस इज रेंडर, जिसको मैं एक्चुअली सर्विस प्रोवाइड कर रहा हूं और कंसिडरेशन नहीं ले रहा हूं, तो एक्चुअल जिसने रिसीव किया है वो रिसिपेंट कहा जाएगा। एजेंट रिलेशनशिप हाउ वीक्स इन रिसीविंग सर्विसेज इफ नो कंसिडरेशन। जैसे मेरा एक एजेंट है और कंसिडरेशन में सप्लाई के लिए पे नहीं कर रहा हूँ, और मैं बोल रहा हूँ सर्विस डायरेक्टली मेरे एजेंट को प्रोवाइड करो, ठीक है, तो इन दैट केस एजेंट विल बी ट्रीटेड एज अ रिसिपिएंट एंड नॉट ऑन माय बिहाफ, ठीक है। What do you mean by return filing? Till now I can't understand this, Tanisha. For all your transactions, whatever you do under GST, it has to be reported to the department, right? It has to be reported to the department. This reporting happens through a formal return called as GST return. So when I say return, it is not returning of goods, this is filing of a return. Okay, this filing of the return is the return thing. What I'm saying, that monthly a return has to be filed, which is called as return. So that I'm referring to return in all these examples. In barter, who is the recipient? In barter, there is no, there is a consideration, right? So in barter, there is a consideration. It is not like it is no without consideration, except in disposal, wherein you don't get anything at all. But in barter, you sell your goods. Instead of getting money, you get something in return. So the person who is returning that, okay, consideration में केस में हमने क्या किया? Consideration is person liable to pay the consideration. If I'm supplying goods to somebody, that person is liable to give me something, right? And he has to give me something, not in money but something else. So it is not saying that if consideration is payable for supply of goods or services in monetary terms only. It just says if consideration, which means it will be both monetary and non-monetary, both. So if consideration is payable for the supply of goods or services, either monetary or non-monetary, the person who is liable to pay you something, he is the recipient. Okay, so the person who is liable to pay the consideration for this supply becomes the recipient. I'm not speaking in Hindi, Kritika, now, so I've seen this. So whenever I've spoken in Hindi, I've translated in English also, so that students in Hindi also can understand, and as a repetition in English also, so that people in English also can understand. Can free samples be treated as supply? Yes, free samples is an example of supply without consideration. Okay. Quarterly returns can be filed. Yes, there are some option of filing of quarterly returns also, wherein a threshold limit is there. If you are below 1.5 crores, you can file your returns quarterly also. ITC is provided after filing return. Yes. So once you file your return, the ITC is provided. Okay. So once we file the return and we disclose the details in the return, that becomes a credit to you. So ITC is actually provided on filing the returns. I wouldn't say after. On the filing of returns itself, you can utilize it for payment of your output tax. Job work goods. Job work goods are not actually supply because you're not selling those goods. You're only giving your goods to a job worker to do something on those goods. So it is not a supply transaction, I would say. It is only movement of goods, wherein you're moving your goods to a job worker's premises so that he will do some activity on it and give it back to you. That's the activity of a job worker. So job work goods are not a sale per se. It is only movement of goods to the job works premises and it will come back to you. So under GST law, there is a procedure set saying that when you should issue the goods, once you issue the goods, within what time you have to get it back. Okay, so if you get it back within such time, then you're complying with the job work procedure. When composition scheme is opted, then quarterly return filing. In case of a composition scheme, there's only one quarterly payment and return has to be filed on an annual basis once in a year. That's the beauty of composition scheme. Right? Supplier we understood, recipient we understood. Now we'll get into the time of supply of goods. Directly, section 12 says what is the time of supply for goods. Okay, so section 12 will tell us what is the time of supply of goods. 12.1 says the liability to pay tax on goods shall arise at the time of supply. So when the liability to tax on goods will arise, we know supply has been defined. So once a supply is taken care, section 12 will determine the liability to pay tax on goods. It means that liability to pay tax on goods shall arise at the time of supply. Time of supply shall be earliest of the following, which is date of issue of invoice, or the last date on which invoice is to be issued, or the date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Right? So it says date of issue of the invoice, or last date on which invoice is to be issued, or date of receipt of payment, which means date of receipt on which payment is entered in the books or payment is credited to his bank account, whichever is earlier. Right? So in case of time of supply, two things is required to be ascertained: date of issue of invoice or the last date on which invoice is to be issued, which means I cannot say that since time of supply says that one of the event is date of issue of invoice, I will postpone the date of issue of invoice. You can't do that because there is a last date on which invoice is to be issued, which is decided in section 31, which says that within what time you have to issue the invoice. Once you move out the goods, you have to raise the invoice at least by then. Beyond that, if you issue, then that will become the time of supply. So earliest of these two things, when the invoice is raised, or the last date on which invoice is to be raised, or the actual receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Right? And if supplier receives up to 1,000, this I will explain you in a bit, wherein up to 1,000 rupees, there is an exception. So what are we saying? Time of supply of goods is earliest of two, date of issue of invoice or the receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. And what is actual receipt of payment? Receipt of payment means payment in the books of accounts. I made a payment entry in my books of accounts, or the payment is credited in bank, whichever is earlier. Let's take an example. Now I have raised the invoice on the 10th of November. Today I have raised the invoice, but the payment for this was received last month itself. And I will say that I will enter in my books the receipt later on. But even though I've received in my bank, that cannot be avoided. To delay this GST payment, I will enter it on the 15th of November. So that I will say 15th of November is the time of supply. To avoid that, government is saying receipt of payment is the payment either in the books of accounts or payment if it is credited in your bank. Now the credit happened on the last month itself. So that becomes the actual receipt of payment, earlier of these two. This is the actual time of supply, but there was a notification which was issued, which gave a clarification, which gave a relaxation saying taxpayers who are under forward charge are not required to pay GST at the time of receipt of advance in relation to supply of goods. What a relaxation. It says that taxpayers you are paying tax under forward charge, because on supply of goods you pay under forward charge. When I'm paying tax under forward charge, I am not required to pay GST on the receipt basis. Okay, so in nutshell, what it says, if you are supplying goods, Baba, you're supplying goods, your time of supply was earliest of date of issue of invoice or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. But they came up with the notification. They saw that doing something like this for goods, that you pay GST as soon as you have received payment and you supply later on, but still once you receive payment, pay GST, was causing hardships. So they removed this point itself completely. This is only for goods, mind you. Advance के ऊपर GST नहीं pay करना है. You don't have to pay advance on, you don't have to pay GST on advance receipt, is only for goods. Which means the time of supply of goods will always be date of issue of invoice. Okay. Now date of issue of invoice will be either if I've issued it on time, then fine. But if I'm not issued it on time, then the date on which I was supposed to issue. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि invoice I prolong later on. I accumulate all the invoices for 1 month, 1 year and raise it only in the month of March. That's not possible, because even if you do it, you are supposed to raise it once you deliver the goods. Section 31 says, when is the time I have to issue an invoice? Once I move the goods out of my premises, or once I segregate the goods for the customer, that time I have to raise an invoice. So if I have raised an invoice, fine. If not, that date will become the date. ठीक है, so कितना इजी कर दिया है गुड्स के लिए कि गुड्स के लिए आई डोंट हैव टू कीप ट्रैकिंग ऑफ माय एडवांसेस. ठीक है, तो कंसिडरिंग द हार्डशिप ऑफ द बिजनेसेस, उन्होंने ऐसा सॉल्यूशन प्रोवाइड कर दिया कि आप सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स कर रहे हो, ठीक है करो, तो आपको एडवांस पे जीएसटी पे करने की जरूरत नहीं. ठीक है, डेट ऑफ इशू इनवॉइस उस दिन की होगी जिस दिन इनवॉइस जनरेट करेंगे. करेक्ट. ठीक है, तो गुड्स का हमने समझ लिया, बहुत सिंपल है कि मेरे को रिसिप्ट ऑफ पेमेंट कंसिडर नहीं करना है और मुझे इश्यू ऑफ इनवॉइस ही कंसिडर करना है. इसके लिए नोटिफिकेशन नंबर 66 ऑफ 2017, इसको आप याद कर लीजिए. फ्यू इंपॉर्टेंट नोटिफिकेशन है, बहुत कम नोटिफिकेशन जिसे आपको याद करना है. वन ऑफ देम इज दिस नोटिफिकेशन नंबर 66 ऑफ 2017 व्हिच गिव्स रिलैक्सेशन और सप्लायर ऑफ गुड्स कि आपको जीएसटी रिसिप्ट ऑफ एडवांस पे भरने की जरूरत नहीं. ठीक है, देन व्हाट इज द टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई फॉर सर्विसेज. टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स, अगेन यहाँ पे डेट ऑफ इश्यू ऑफ इनवॉइस और रिसिप्ट ऑफ पेमेंट. नाउ व्हेन शुड आई इश्यू दिस इनवॉइस. ठीक है, मैंने यहाँ पे पिछले साइड में भी कहा दिया था, टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स इज डेट ऑफ इश्यू ऑफ इनवॉइस और रिसिप्ट ऑफ पेमेंट. अगेन यहाँ पे बोल रहा हूँ, डेट ऑफ टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स इन केस ऑफ इज द डेट ऑफ इश्यू ऑफ इनवॉइस और द रिसिप्ट ऑफ पेमेंट. नाउ बाय व्हाट टाइम आई हैव टू रेज अ इनवॉइस where the supply involves movement of goods and in a case where supply does not involve movement of goods. जैसे मैंने कुछ सप्लाई किया है, उसका डिलीवरी होना है. Like if I am supplier of steel rolls, then it involves movement of goods. It involves removal of goods. Okay, when then involves movement of goods, then I have to issue the invoice before removal of the goods. And if there is no movement of goods, I gave you an example, no, saying that if it is a case of a construction site and there is no movement, there's only apportionment because sand is lying, cement is lying there, and I'm a supplier of cement. I have set up my plant at the place where the construction is going on because delivery delay hota hai. And I don't want that I should delay my delivery. So I have set up a plant, batching plant in the place where the manufacturing construction is happening. There I am only segregating the goods ki itna goods aapka hai, it is still under process. So delivery of the goods are making the goods available. So once I make this goods available, that itself is the point of time where I have to raise an invoice. ठीक है, थोड़ा टेक्निकल लग रहा है बिकॉज मैं टेक्निकल कर दिया हूं इसको. एक्चुअल में सिंपल है. टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स काफी इजी है, वेरी सिंपल इट इज. वेयर द सप्लाई इन्वॉल्व मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स ऑन द रिमूवल ऑफ द गुड्स, and where it does not involve movement, when it is delivery of goods or making the goods available. ठीक है, एग्जाम्पल के साथ समझ गए आप या एनी कुछ क्वेरीज है इसमें? If material and invoice received after 15 days on next month. So okay, whenever you have received the material, so it's from a supplier's perspective, Nitesh Patel, from a supplier's perspective, if he delivers the goods, if he removes the goods, before removal of the goods, he has to issue the invoice. Okay. So if liability to pay tax is at the time of supply, does that mean that GST returns must be filed daily? If yes, how will we claim ITC? No. So that's what it's saying. If the time of supply, liability to pay tax doesn't apply at the time of supply, that is triggered. That is the point when it is triggered because there are various points. जैसे हमने देखा था कि एडवांस एक महीने में आ सकता है, इनवॉइस दूसरे महीने में हो सकता है, तो कंफ्यूजन हो गया कि कब जीएसटी पे करे. एंड दे हैव क्लैरिफाइड कि सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स के केस में आप जब इनवॉइस रेज करोगे तभी आपका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई है. तो ये जो मैं इनवॉइस रेज किया हूँ आज, तो इसका टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई इज टुडे. अगर इफ आई रेज इट टुमारो, देन द टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई इज टुमारो. वैसे देयर विल बी टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई फॉर वेरियस सप्लाईज व्हिच आई डू. So I will accumulate all the supplies for a month. The date of this, I will file in the return and pay the taxes on the due date of the return. So I don't have to pay taxes every day. I don't have to file taxes every day. And I don't have to file returns every day. I will accumulate that and pay it in the monthly return itself. Removal of goods means what? When I remove the goods, I have a showroom, I'm selling a mobile, it involves movement of goods, right? All goods practically will involve removal. So any goods when I'm removing, so if I come to my shop and I'm selling you mobile, so once I remove it and give it to you, that's the point key. I have removed my goods from my warehouse, go down or from my shelf and given it to you. When I've removed the goods, that is the time when the invoice has to be raised. That is the meaning of removal of goods. Or if I'm manufacturer, I remove the goods in a lorry and give it to you. That is the point of removal of the goods. Removal of the goods means taking of the goods from my custody and giving it to anybody. Okay? So, but in case of other than movement, like we have given the example of other than movement, keep construction site pe jab hota hai, when the goods are made available, that becomes the time of supply. Okay? Supply of generator to the marriage is supply of service or goods. Goods are moving. Very good question. Pranav, आपकी शादी का देख लिया आपने? लगता है आप शादी के in your marriage you have seen this activity happen. So you're very keen on this question. So in case of marriage where the generator is let out, it is movement of goods, but the ownership is not getting transferred. So we are only hiring the generator. So it is a supply of service. When the goods are bought, it is supply of goods. When the goods are made available temporarily for use, it is services. So generator given on any occasion is supply of services. Movement of goods applies to which industries? All industries. You buy anything in any industry, movement of goods will apply. It could be raw material, it could be finished goods, it could be any business, it could be steel business, plastic business, manufacturing sector, all where goods are there, their movement of goods will involve. And it must be done on 20th. Yes, returns must be done on the 20th and 22nd. There are various dates. So based on those dates, it has to be paid off. More examples needed for other than movement. Okay. So other than movement, it will involve where there is I would give other than movement. If I have I think that's the best example for construction, but there could be other examples wherein the goods are made available to you and you use it as and when required. Like there is a kind of, I cannot keep delivering the goods based on your orders. I've delivered bunch of goods and I've kept it over there at your go down. And as and when you require, you take it. So as and when you take it, it is made available to you. Then it is an example of other than movement. Okay. If goods are returned to supplier, then GST is payable. Then, so when I sell goods, I pay GST. Once it is returned, then I reduce my GST. So supply is on, GST is on supply, outward supply. And when there is a return, then I have to reduce my GST to that extent. Okay. Removal of goods includes semi-finished goods also. Yeah, if you're selling semi-finished goods, then it is removal. But if you're removing semi-finished goods and it is still within your custody and you are moving it from one place to another to make it as a finished goods, then it is not actually removal. Removal of goods for sale is what is covered here. One more example of supply involves movement of goods. Okay. So two examples I'll give you: when I'm selling the mobile from my shelf or when I'm supplying the steel rolls to the customer. Other example, removal of goods, right? Uske liye chahiye. When supply involves movement of goods. Take the example that I am here and I have told my vendor to supply me 100 tube lights from Chennai to Bangalore. So from Chennai, I have not gone to the Chennai, but he'll pack the goods and he will ship the goods. So that is the example of movement of goods, where the goods are moving from one state to another state. It is a movement of goods within the state also. In my example, it is from one state to another state. He is moving the goods from that state to another state is the example of movement of goods. Okay. So when I place an order and the party moves the goods, then it is example of supply involving movement of goods. Sale on approval basis is an example of other than movement. No, sale on approval basis is also an example of sales involving movement of goods. It's just that on approval basis, since the sale is not crystallized, you have not decided whether you'll buy or no. That's the reason the time of supply is different. But sale and approval basis is also falls under the category of movement of goods. So it depends on the characters of the goods. रोड बनाने के लिए यूज की जाने वाली गुड्स क्या है? दैट इज ऑल्सो गुड्स कि आप कंस्ट्रक्शन रोड जब बनाते हैं वहां पे आपका ढेरा लग जाता है कि स्टोन्स पूरे साइड पे रहते हैं और जैसे जैसे चाहिए आप यूज कर सकते हो. सो दैट इज एन एग्जांपल ऑफ सप्लाई इन्वॉल्विंग अदर देन मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स. ओके, सो basically they're saying once the goods are moved, uske pehle you have to raise the invoice, and if it is other than movement, once you make the goods available, before that raise the invoice. तो simple कि invoice मुझे कब raise करनी है? जब मेरे actual में sale कर दिया उसके पहले आपको invoice raise करना है, क्योंकि आप अगर invoice delay करेंगे तो फिर GST का control नहीं रहेगा. So they have kept this limits. और receipt of payment तो नहीं है अभी, so this is not relevant. फिर ठीक है. What are the exceptions? Exception says receipt of amount up to ₹1,000 in excess. ठीक है, जैसे मैंने 10,000 का बिल किया है, अब सामने वाले पार्टी ने मुझे 11,000 दे दिया है, राउंड ऑफ करके 10,500 दे दिया है. सो टू दिस एक्सटेंट ऑफ ₹500 आपको टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई अलग से करने की जरूरत नहीं है. आप जब भी 500 का नेक्स्ट इनवॉइस रेज करोगे और एडजस्ट करोगे, दैट विल बिकम द टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई. फॉर दिस एक्सेस अमाउंट आपको कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है. सो रिसिप्ट ऑफ अमाउंट अप टू ₹1,000 इन एक्सेस इज ओके. और supply deemed to have been made to the extent of invoice or value of payment, it will not become relevant here क्योंकि ये receipt of payment का condition है ही नहीं. So this will not make relevance here. Services में relevance करेगा. Now ये क्या हुआ? डायरेक्टली लास्ट स्लाइड में पहुंच गए. ठीक है. नाउ वी हैव अंडरस्टूड सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स. अभी एक और डेफिनेशन पढ़ेंगे विच इज कंटिन्यूअस सप्लाई. नॉर्मल डिलीवरी ऑफ द गुड्स, मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स, ये तो समझ में आ गया. अभी कुछ चीजें होती है जिसे बोलते हैं कंटिन्यूअस सप्लाई. कंटिन्यूअस सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स मीन्स सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स विच इज प्रोवाइडेड और अग्रीड टू बी प्रोवाइडेड कंटिन्यूअसली ऑन अ रिकरेंट बेसिस. कंटिन्यूअस बेसिस पे आप गुड्स सप्लाई करते हो अंडर अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, वेदर or not by means of what modes you could transport or deliver the goods through wire, cable, pipeline or any other conduit, and for which the supplier invoice the recipient on a regular basis. हमने देख लिया है कि movement of goods and all those things are there, but if there is continuous supply of goods, then how do you decide when is the time of supply? That's where this definition of continuous supply of goods, wherein you are delivering the goods through a wire. Wire से क्या transport कर रहे हो? Say electricity, or through a cable, फाइन, और थ्रू पाइपलाइन. पाइपलाइन से क्या हो सकता है? आपने पाइपलाइन सेटअप कर दिया है और आप कंटिन्यूअस ऑयल सप्लाई कर रहे हो. ठीक है. और एनी अदर मोड फॉर विच द सप्लायर इनवॉइस द रिसिपिएंट ऑन अ रेगुलर और पीरियोडिक बेसिस, एंड इट इंक्लूड सप्लाई ऑफ सच गुड्स एज द गवर्नमेंट में सब्जेक्ट टू सच कंडीशंस नोटिफाई. गवर्नमेंट को भी पावर दिया है कि ऐसा कुछ बिजनेस होता है जो continuous supply होते हैं, so then government can notify saying that this will be treated as continuous supply. But generally, what is continuous supply? Example would be a pipeline. उसको आप you should understand कि petrol is getting used at a factory and they don't want it to get delivered through a truck or a lorry. They said between your plant and my plant, you set up a pipeline since I'm using the fuel on a regular basis. So they will have a meter reading over there and they will invoice it, say, on a periodic basis. It could be any period, it could be once in 10 days, once in a month, or once in 15 days, wherein I'm raising invoice based on this reading. That is the example of continuous supply of goods. Also, there could be continuous supply of services. Now, in continuous supply of goods, we have seen that it is just that it should be continuously supplied. No timeline is there. Now read the definition of services. Continuous supply of services means a supply of services which is provided okay, or agreed to be provided continuously or on a recurrent basis under a contract for a period exceeding 3 months. So here there is a period which is defined saying I am supplying some services for a period more than 3 months with periodic payment obligations. And it includes supply of such services as the government may subject to such conditions notified, saying that government ko power diya. This is there as a default rule in most of the cases. Even in supply we have seen, and here also we are seeing government को full authority दिया है. ठीक है, कल के दिन गवर्नमेंट ये नहीं बोलना चाहिए कि there is something happening and I don't have a control. So to give them powers, they have included this clauses saying that wherever there are transactions of doubtful nature, their government will give a notification saying that this is my clarification and this is supply of service, continuous supply of service, and this is continuous supply of goods. Okay, so continuous supply of services means a supply of services which is provided or agreed to be provided continuously or on a recurrent basis under a contract for a period exceeding 3 months with periodic payment obligations and include supply of such services as the government may notify. Okay, continuous becomes a continuous supply of services. क्यों important है? क्योंकि इनका time of supply दूसरा हो सकता है. Another good example given by Ekrar is selling of dust from a crusher, right? That is also example of continuous supply because from the crusher continuously goods are being going out. So that's the example of continuous supply. If I supply water from a village to a city, that is also continuous supply. Fine. Buy now, pay later in post office is continuous service? No, it is not. You buy now, pay later, it's one activity. It is not a continuous activity. So that's not a continuous service. To make available goods, first we have to make a movement of goods, right? You have to make the movement of goods, but you're not making the movement of goods and selling it. You're making the movement of goods for yourself. That's where there is a difference. Wi-Fi services is supply of goods. Wi-Fi services is supply of services because there is no movement of goods there. Internet service provider, yes, is a supply of services. Continuous supply, yes, because every time you keep getting the services and the contract term is more than 3 months. It is a good example of supply of service, continuous supply of services. Taxable event kya hoga? That is where we will reach to. Good excitement saying that when will you tell me about time of supply? We will get to that. Treatment of a person who is in coma for last 3 months when it is continuous supply of services. Can't say so because it is not a continuous supply of service. It is each day billing, but it gets accumulated. So it's a per day activity which gets billed accumulatedly. So it is not a continuous supply of service. ठीक है, like a chartered accountant services, जैसे हम ऑडिट वगैरह जाते हैं 4 महीने के लिए जाते हैं, 5 महीने के लिए जाते हैं, बड़े बड़े ऑडिट के लिए. Once we go there for 5 months, can we say it's an example of continuous supply of service? बड़े बड़े ऑडिट्स, लिस्टिंग कंपनी के ऑडिट्स जब करने होते हैं, it starts from February, ends somewhere in August or September. So it involves more than 3 months. So will you call it as continuous supply of service? No, that is not a continuous supply of service because there is no periodic payments involved. First of all, technically, the payment will come after completion of audit itself. Secondly, it is not that I'm giving the continuous service. I'm giving one service. The duration of this is more than 3 months. So that has to be distinguished between continuous supply of service means I'm providing service on a continuous basis. But in case of my example of providing audit for 3 months period, it is one project. It is one supply of audit service. The duration is big. So that doesn't become an example of continuous supply of service. Okay. Supply of mineral ores from mines, yes. Housekeeping is not continuous supply because he does the work continuously. Like if I do accounting services, I'm doing the work continuously, but it is just that the continuation is happening, but the contract is monthly, my accounting work gets completed. In case of a housekeeper, his work gets completed on a monthly basis, but the payment is also happening on a monthly basis. He will raise the invoice on a monthly basis. Okay. Renting of house, no. We'll see a lot of confusion between this continuous supply of service and actual service on a monthly basis. It is supply of service on a monthly basis, but it is bundled to make it continuously going. जैसे if I'm taken a rental of a premises, it is liable to GST. Now I'm staying there continuously. So will you call it as a continuous supply? No. The contract is monthly payment I will do and monthly invoice I will raise, but you can continue staying over here. Okay. So it is for convenience purpose that the rental agreement is made for 1 year and 2 year, but it is not an example of continuous supply of service because I can terminate that any point of time, and it's actually 1 month's rental which is bundled into 12 months. So all of these examples, we'll see that most of this are not continuous supply of service. Purely one service which is continuing for on a regular basis is example of continuous supply of service. So payment after 2 years received, but sale partly received goods. Fine. So still time of supply will be when you have supplied the good because it is not linked to payment. ICA classes is continuous supply of service. You not exactly because if the class is continuous for more than 3 months and it's a bundle service, then it is yes. Annual membership charges by yes, annual membership charges is a good example of continuous supply of services. Now we'll see what is the time of supply. Okay, in case of continuous supply of goods, where the successive payments of accounts or successive payments are involved, then you have to give account statement on a periodic basis or you have to make payment on a periodic basis. The invoice shall be issued when the invoice shall be issued before or at the time each such statement is issued, or as the case may be, each payment is received. So continuous supply of service may you have agreed that you will give a monthly statement. Then the time when you have to give an invoice, you have to give the invoice before giving of this account statement. Or if there is no clause of account statement, the agreement says that you have to make only periodic payments on a monthly basis. Then periodic payments is monthly. So your time you have to issue invoice on a monthly basis. Fine. So in case of continuous supply of goods, when the successive pay statement of accounts or successive payments are involved, the invoice has to be issued before that. Where the goods being sent are taken on sale or approval basis. Okay. Where the goods are sent on approval or sale of return basis. How do we understand this? I have gone to a jewelry shop. Okay. I have gone there. Now I have taken I've taken my articles over there and I've told that you can take a pair of earrings from here. Now, if you like it or you don't like it, articles you will not decide, because who will decide? You will go and show it to your boyfriend, or people who don't have boyfriend, you'll show it to your parents. Once they approve, only then you'll buy it. Because later on you come and tell the showroom guy I want to exchange, he will not exchange. So I have made an arrangement with the showroom guy saying that you are my client. So you give me a special privilege that I will buy the jewelry for my articles. They will confirm it. Only then I will pay you, or only then you can raise the invoice. Till then, I'm just keeping it. And if they don't like it, they will return it to you also. That privilege also I have. Okay. So not everybody will get this privilege, no. But for my articles, I've taken this privilege. Now they have come with me. They've selected it. They've gone to their respective boyfriends or respective parents, and they have kept it with them. Their parents have decided that they will approve it. Now they are out of station. They have sent it over there and then got it back. They can't send it by courier, no. Jewelry is a costly item. So they have physically gone. Whenever I approved their leave, they have gone, shown it to the parents and come back. They've said, okay, I liked it. So I will give a confirmation to the supplier saying that, okay, this one article I said, he liked it. You can raise the invoice now. Now, one more article. What happened? Instantly, she was supposed to show it to her boyfriend. By the time she could show it to her boyfriend, she changed the boyfriend. So she found another boyfriend. And this process took more than 6 months. By 7th month, she's coming and telling, sir, I like this jewelry. Now you buy it to me. I went to the supplier and said, boss, this personal issue has happened. So that's why, because of her change of her personal priorities, she has come to me on the 7th month. Now you raise the invoice. So he said, sir, I've raised the invoice long back because GST gave me time of only 6 months. She has to decide within 6 months and give it to me. If she has decided late, then you have to pay me tax on the 6th month itself. Okay, 6 months time diya hai on approval of sale or return basis. When the goods being sent are taken on approval for sale or return basis are removed before the supply takes place, then the invoice shall be issued before or at the time of supply or 6 months from the date of removal, whichever is earlier. Okay. So invoice shall be issued before or at the time of supply or 6 months from the date of removal means time of supply will be when I've approved it or within 6 months. So maximum time limit for approval will be 6 months. This change of boyfriend and chakkar and all can go up to 6 months, not beyond that. Okay. So sale on approval or return basis, time limit is maximum 6 months. Now, time of supply of goods under reverse charge. Now, you have seen forward charge. Now, we'll see under reverse charge. Time of supply is earliest of the following dates. Date of receipt of the goods. Okay, actual receipt of the goods, because reverse charge on goods will be by whom? It will be by a person who is not registered and you have to pay. Right? In that case, the time of supply will be the date of receipt of the goods or date immediately following 30 days from the issue of invoice or any other document, or the date of payment which is entered in the books of accounts of the recipient, or the date on which payment is debited, whichever is earlier. If it is not possible to determine the option under A, B, or C, then time of supply is date of entry in the books of accounts of the recipient. Okay. Under RCM, the date of invoice is not the time of supply. Matlab, once the supplier gives to me, if he's unregistered, he may give an invoice or he may not give an invoice. So I have that invoice date is not considered here at all, because in supply of goods, we saw date of invoice was relevant. But in case of reverse charge, invoice is not at all a point, because that is not the relevant point, because I have to pay tax. When I will pay the tax, either on receipt of the goods or I get a time of 30 days, date of receipt of the goods, or 30 days following the date of issue of invoice or other document. If the supplier has given me an invoice, then 30 days from that date, or receipt of goods, or date of payment, whichever is earlier. So in case of reverse charge, I have to see these 3 days. Okay. If she returns the jewelry after 6 months, then within 6 months. So if I've bought it on 1st January, within 30th June, she has to decide. If you have decided in July, then 30th June, the supplier will raise her invoice. Okay. Is delivery of goods and making available of goods same? No, it is different. Delivery of goods is actual delivery of the goods. Making the goods available is apportioning and making the goods available. Okay. When I am giving the right of these goods, that is called as making the goods available. Delivery of the goods is actual delivery. Now, time of supply and reverse charge, we understood 3 points. Date of delivery of the goods, 30 days from the date of issue of invoice, or the date of payment, whichever is earlier. Now, in case of vouchers, which is exchangeable for goods, if I have got some vouchers and I can exchange it for goods only. There are some vouchers which are general vouchers. Like if you go to Shopper Stop or if you go to Lifestyle, you can get a voucher and you can purchase anything. Right? Now, what will you purchase? You don't know. And the value of the goods, the rate of goods will differ. So when it is not there for ascertained goods, when the supply is not identifiable, then the time of supply is the date of redemption. But if there is a condition saying that this voucher can be utilized for purchase of perfumes only, Then you know what is the GST rate on purchase. This voucher will be used for purchase of voucher of for purchase of perfume only, and the rate of perfume is known. Then the date of issue of voucher only becomes the date. Okay, the date of the voucher itself will be the date of time of supply. But if it is not identifiable on the date of issue of invoice, then it is equivalent to giving money. So उस दिन आपको पता नहीं है, so you will not treat that time of supply. You'll be the treating the time of supply when this voucher is redeemed. Okay. And in case when it is not possible to determine time of supply in any of these three things, in the cases what we have discussed, then when the periodical return has been filed, the date of return filing will be the time of supply, or in other case, when the date on which tax is paid. So basically, if you're not able to determine, then the date of your return and date of payment will become the time of supply. Okay. Now, so what we understood, time of supply of vouchers is if the supply is identifiable, then the date of issue of voucher, because on the date of supply of this voucher, you know that it will be redeemed for services. Suppose a gym gives a voucher, you can redeem it only for the gym. So you can redeem it only for that. So once you issue this voucher, that will become the date of issue of the voucher. But if it's a general voucher and the supply is not identifiable, then the date of redemption of the voucher. In case of residuary clause, where it is not possible to determine the time of supply of goods and services, then it will be when the periodic return is filed, or in other case, when the date on which the tax is paid. Clear? She couldn't return the goods, then it is for the supplier to pay the tax, because he's moved the goods out and he couldn't do it. So he's taken the risk and supplied the goods. So he has to raise the invoice within 6 months. Means sale of goods as is not applicable here. Yeah, unfortunately, because in sale of goods act, the terms are different. In GST Act, it will be different. Okay, so we understood time of supply of goods. We'll take a break of 10 minutes and we'll understand the time of supply of services. Okay. Amazon gift card is an example of a voucher which is not identified, because Amazon gift card, you can use it for any purchase on the Amazon portal. Now you don't know what is the rate of GST on the goods which you will redeem. So it is a voucher which is not identifiable. Okay. Okay. Now we'll discuss on, so residual clause says where a periodical return is to be filed, then the date on which return is required to be filed, or in any other cases, date on which GST is paid becomes the time of supply for goods. Now we'll see what happens in case of special charges. We are still on supply of goods only. So in special supply of goods, there could be some special charges which is levied. Okay, due to delay in payment, what could we collect in case of delay in payment? Interest, penalty, or late filing fees. So I have supplied some goods to my customer, and I have mentioned that if you don't make the payment on time, then you have to either pay me interest, or it could be that I will collect some penalty or late filing fees. In that case, GST will be on receipt basis. Okay, because this interest, like in case of supply of goods, it is on invoice, not on payment. So once I raise an invoice, then I have to pay the GST. Whether the receiver pays me or no, I have to pay the GST to the government because I have raised the invoice and it is a commercial transaction with the customer and I will collect from him later on. So that becomes a kind of on accrual basis, saying that I have supplied the goods and it is my responsibility to pay to the government, and it is the responsibility of my collection from the customer. But in case of this interest, penalty, and late filing, the government has said these are all special charges which you are collecting for the default by the customers. First of all, he's not paid you the payment for your regular supply. So I don't want to levy GST on these additional charges unless the recipient pays you. So once the recipient pays you, then pay me this. That's why they've said in case of this interest, penalty, and late fees, you can pay GST on your actual receipt basis. Okay, so in these three cases of interest, penalty, and late fees, it is on receipt basis. Saying actually, when you charge it to interest to the customer through a debit note or any other instrument, and he actually pays you, that time you pay the taxes to me. Okay, so clearly supply of goods is on invoice basis, but late filing, special charges for the delay in payment, that is on receipt basis. And any other default, if it is linked to the original supply, if there's any other default wherein he's not completed his contract, and if it is linked to the original supply, then GST is based on the debit note, which means the date of debit note will be the date of invoice. If it is a supply in itself, okay, then it will be treated as a separate supply wherein I've supplied some goods, okay, and there is some repair work which is to be done. And if it is linked to the supply, okay, and then I will raise a separate debit note. But if it is not linked to the supply, like I have supplied a tools, or like a machinery I've supplied. Now for this machinery, the customer has done some kind of harsh use for which I have to do some other treatment. I have to supply a tool to him. So then this tool supply is an independent supply. Then for this tool, when I raise an invoice, that time I will pay the GST, and it is not linked to my original supply. If it is linked to the original supply, then GST will be based on the date of debit note. If it is not linked to the original supply, then it will become an independent supply in itself. Okay, so clearly special charges, if it is for late payment, it is on risk basis. If it is anything other than late payment charges, then you'll have to see if it is linked to the original supply or not. If it is linked to your original supply, then GST is based on debit note. Otherwise, it is the supply in itself. Time of supply of services. So we understood time of supply of goods in detail. Now we'll get into time of supply of services. We saw that in time of supply of goods, the payment basis, invoice or receipt, whichever is earlier was the term, but the receipt part, they've removed it. So on the date of issue of invoice, we'll pay the GST. But in case of time of supply, that exemption is not there. So time of supply of services will be if the invoice is issued within time or after time. If the invoice is issued within 30 days, right? Now, there is a time limit within which invoice has to be issued. There, in case of supply of goods, we had issue of invoice. But in case of supply of services, we have issue of 30 days. So in case of supply of goods, we had issue of invoice. But in case of supply of services, we had issue of 30 days. So in case of supply of goods, we had issue of invoice. But in case of supply of services, we had issue of invoice. But in case of supply of services, there in time, when can the invoice be issued? When the goods are moved, or in case of movement of goods. In case of non-movement of goods, when the when the goods are made available. But such conditions cannot be there in case of supply of services because there is no actual goods which are getting involved, right? So in case of time of supply of services, physical goods are not there. So that's why I've said invoice is issued within 30 days of the supply of service, because there is a in the nature of intangible thing. So you should at least raise the invoice within 30 days of provision of service. If I have raised the invoice on time within 30 days, then the time of supply will be issue of invoice or the receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Okay. Now, if another scenario is if I have not issued the invoice within 30 days or 45 days, then what happens? The invoice time of supply will be the receipt of payment or the provision of service, whichever is earlier. Receipt of payment or provision of service, whichever is earlier, which means I have provided the service on the 30th of October. And I have raised the invoice on time. Say within 30 days, I have a time, 30 days time I have, which means 30th October's supply, what I've completed supply of services, I can raise it within 30th November. If I have raised the invoice by 30th November, my time of supply will be 30th November or actual receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Fine, clear, understood. Now, if I don't raise the invoice by 30th November, if I've raised it on the 15th of December, or if I've raised it on the 1st of December also, then I have not issued the invoice on time. Then what happens? The time of supply will be not the date of invoice or the last date when I was supposed to raise the invoice. It moves back to the date of provision of service, which is completed on 30th October. The 30th October or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. See the implication. I have to issue the invoice on time. They've given a discipline. You issue the invoice on time, then we will consider date of invoice or receipt of payment. But if you don't issue it on time, then you'll go back to as a default you made, time of supply will go to the date of provision of service. Be careful with this. If you raise an invoice on time, good. Otherwise, the time of supply will go back to the date of provision of service. That 30 days leeway you will not get. Now, what is this 45 days? In case of insurance companies, in case of banking companies and financial institutions, three institutions, insurance company, banking company, or financial institutions, you can raise it within 45 days because these companies have a lot of transactions. So they've said within 45 days of provision of service, you can raise for these three institutions. Other than this, everybody has to raise invoice within 30 days. Okay. Now, what is this receipt of payment? Receipt of payment means payment in the books of accounts when I've showed as receipt in my books, or when the payment is credited in my bank, whichever is earlier. So receipt of payment will be decided on actual entry in the books or receipt in my bank, whichever is earlier. Exceptions to this is first, receipt of an amount up to rupees 1,000 in excess. Let's understand this with an example. Supply of services, typical example could be a mobile company, mobile postpaid company, or an internet service provider. Now, this mobile postpaid company has raised an invoice of 700 rupees plus GST. It comes to around 788. Say, for example, it is 788. Now, we made a round payment of 1,000 rupees. So, how much is the excess? The excess is around 220. Now, this excess up to 1,000 rupees, they've said, it is received in advance. So you have to pay GST on this again. The government is saying up to 1,000 rupees in excess, you don't have to worry of time of supply being on earliest of the two. There you could keep it on the invoice because this 222, you will adjust with the next invoice. So for this 222, don't pay it on advance basis. You can either pay it on advance basis or pay it on the issue of invoice. Okay. So this is the meaning of receipt of amount up to rupees 1,000 in excess and exception, which means for this excess amount up to 1,000 rupees, you don't have to pay GST on receipt basis. You can pay it on the invoice basis itself. Okay. ताकि आपको whatever is excess, you don't have to pay charges, GST on this and round off and things like that. So up to 1,000 rupees in excess, you can pay GST on the invoice basis. Other exception is supply is deemed to be have been made to the extent of invoice or value of supply. What does this mean? I have raised the invoice, but I have received the payment in advance. So I will pay GST in advance, which means it is deemed to the extent of advance what you have received, you have provided the service and you can pay GST. That is, why should I pay on GST on advance? Because I have not made a supply. So they've said to the extent of the advance what you have made, it will be treated as supply is deemed to be have been made to the extent of advance. Okay. So time of supply of services, nutshell, if you're raising an invoice within time, what is the time? 30 days, 45 days for insurance companies, banking and financial institutions. Otherwise, it is 30 days. If I issue the invoice on time, then the time of supply is earliest of issue of invoice or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. But if you have delayed it, then that will be receipt basis, actual payment, or on provision of service, whichever is earlier. Okay. Time of supply, time limit for issuance of invoice, insurance company, banking, financial institution, including a NBFC or a telecom operator making supplies may issue the invoice at such time supplier record the same in the books of accounts or after the expiry of the quarter during the supply was made. Which means there is a rule 47, which says that for an insurance or a banking company or a financial institution, including an NBFC, who are making taxable supply of services between distinct persons. Within one PAN, they have various branches. So between these branches, if there is any issue of invoice, they may issue the invoice before or at the time such supplier records the same in the books of accounts, or the expiry of the quarter. So any inter-branch transaction, which is between distinct persons within the same PAN, they're having multiple registrations in a state, or one registration, one state, another registration, one state, and there is some cross billing, right? That on that also GST is payable, like how we saw branch transfer, GST is payable. Similarly, branch transfer of services can happen through this cross billing. That time of supply will be issue of invoice at the time, which means when I make an entry that this amount is receivable, or at the end of the quarter. Either quarterly you raise an invoice, or when you make an entry in your books, that will be treated as time of supply. You can't get delayed because there'll be so much of cross charge. Like I have one check collection charges from one banking branch to another banking branch and providing services. So I will raise a debit note to them. I could raise it at the end of the year. So they've said if you're raising at the end of the year, you pay the GST on quarterly basis because that's the maximum time limit given. On a quarterly basis, whatever is the transactions, based on that, you have to pay the GST. Okay. Time limit for issuance of invoice in case of continuous supply of services, where the due date same like for goods what we had for continuous supply of services, where the due date is ascertainable from the contract, then the invoice will be issued on the due date of the payment. Or where the due date is not ascertainable from the contract, the invoice shall be issued before or the time when the supplier receives the payment. Okay, the due date will be mentioned in the contract. If it is mentioned before that due date, raise the invoice. If the due date is not mentioned, then when the supplier receives the payment, or when the payment is linked to completion of an event, like if I have construction of a flat and I will raise invoice on construction of each floor. So it's a milestone basis, completion of some event. Then the invoice should be issued on or before the date of completion of that event. Okay, so construction of an apartment is an example of continuous supply of services, wherein I'll say for each floor, if I do, I will raise invoice. So before you each completion of milestone, you have to raise the invoice. Where the supply of services ceases under a contract, matlab, we have entered into a contract. Now this contract is rescinded or cancelled. Then invoice time of supply will be before the completion of the supply. The invoice shall be issued at the time when the supply ceases, and such invoice shall be issued to the extent of supply made before cessation. So if I have terminated the contract, I have pre-closed the contract, then the time of supply would be when the supply ceases. Till 15 days I'll provide you a service. So up till last month, I have already raised an invoice. For this month, for 15 days, I will raise an invoice. Up to the time the before the cessation, whatever service I provided, or to that extent, I have to raise an invoice. Okay. Provision of service examples: accountant services, lawyer services, software services. These are all example of provision of services. So in case of IPL, they are not included in cost of goods, so they should not even supply. But in case of IPL, Pranav, there is a supply, no? Because I'm collecting additional consideration. There is no cost, but there is a additional consideration which is flowing to you. So that's the reason for this also it's a supply. Anything you collect from your customers in relation to your supply is also a supply. Okay, understood. Time of supply, time of issue of invoice for continuous supply. Now, time of supply of services under reverse charge. Like how we have reverse charge for goods, we have reverse charge for services, which we have discussed in detail. What is the time limit for reverse charge? Now, on reverse charge basis, time of supply is earliest of the following: date of payment, okay, which is date of payment in the books or debited in the bank account, or date immediately following 60 days from the date of issue of invoice, whichever is earlier. So in forward charge, it is within 30 days, but in reverse charge, it is 60 days. Okay. And then if it is not possible to determine under A or B, then the time of supply is date of entry in the books of accounts. Fine. So where you're not able to determine in any of these two conditions, then date of entry in the books of accounts. And in case of any associated enterprises, which means where the supplier is located outside India, matlab, outside India, you have a branch or you have a kind of a branch office outside India, then, and if he's providing some services to you, then the time of supply will be date of entry in the books of accounts or payment, whichever is earlier, because in between branches, what happens, they may not raise invoices, but just a book entry is made saying this amount is payable based on your accounts, based on your accounting standards, based on your various treatment of Ind AS, you may have to pass an entry in the book saying this amount is payable. So once you pass this entry, that becomes the time of supply. Okay. Now we'll understand the time of supply of goods on reverse charge basis for goods and services that we can understand. For reverse charge for goods, we said what? The earliest of receipt of goods or date of payment or 30 days from the issue of invoice, whichever is earlier. If not any of these dates, then the date of recording becomes a supply. Then we have reverse charge for services. It is earliest of. There we had receipt of goods, but in services, do we have receipt of goods? No, we don't have any receipt of goods. So this condition is not there. Date of payment is there? Yes. Here also you may have some date of payment. So date of payment, in case of 30 days, here how many days you have? 60 days. So to distinguish between goods and services, for goods it is 30 days, for services it is 60 days for RCM. If not, the date of recording of supply. Then in case of associate enterprises, like how we had seen, in case of associated enterprises, if the supplier is located outside India, the date of recording supply in the recipient books or date of payment, that becomes the time of supply. How electricity supply is supply of goods, it should be supply of services. Electricity is a goods for the purpose of GST. Anyways, it is neither goods nor services, but there is a big contradiction. That's why electricity is treated as goods, but there is no GST on electricity supply. Okay, so reverse charge on goods and services, we understood the distinction, right? In case of associated enterprises, supplier who is located outside India, and if he's providing some services, it will be the date of entry in the books of accounts. Okay, understand this. Date supply of services from associated enterprises located outside India. Within India, you have your company, and there is a supply by a associated enterprise who is staying outside India. If they are providing any supply to you, then the time of supply will be earliest of these three things, which is date of entry of service in the books of account, or date of payment, or the date of entry of the services in the books of account of the recipient, whichever is earlier. Clear? Okay. So the time of supply of goods in a nutshell is simple like this. Time of supply of goods under forward charge will be date of issue of invoice or the due date when the invoice has to be issued. When it has to be issued in case of movement before the movement of goods, in case of other than movement, when the goods are apportioned, or so date of issue of invoice or the due date of issue of tax invoice or the date of recording the payment in the books of accounts, which is not there. So basically, it is no GST at the time of receipt. It will be basically date of issue of invoice itself. These sections are there, but it is removed through a notification or a relaxation is given through a notification. Once the notification goes out, then on supply of goods also we have to pay on advance basis. But till that notification is there, which says that GST at the time of receipt of advance, you don't have to pay, you can use the benefit. Okay. Then supply of goods under reverse charge will be date of actual receipt of goods, okay, or date of recording the payment, or date on which payment is actually made, or 31st day from the supplier's invoice. आपके पास invoice आ गया है and you have not made the payment. So within 31st day of receipt of invoice, on the 31st day, your time of supply triggers and you have to make the payment of GST. Whether you make payment to the vendor or no, you have received the invoice. Within 30 days, you make the payment. Okay. If not, on the 31st day of the date of invoice, you have to pay GST. If above events are not ascertainable, saying that you're complaining, saying that I don't have any of these dates, then time of supply is when you have entered in your books of accounts. Okay. This is a simple chapter, but various dates you'll have to remember so that you'll be having some clarity on this. Then time of supply of vouchers, which is exchangeable for goods, will be the date of issue of the voucher if the supply is identifiable. Supply means the actual supply is identifiable, because voucher there will be a supply, but identifiable supply has to be there, saying that what is the goods you will do, you will redeem against this voucher. If the date is, and if the goods are not identifiable, then the redemption of the voucher date. Okay. Then in case of supply of services, time of supply of services under forward charge, time of supply of services under forward charge when the invoice is issued within the time specified. Okay. What is the time specified in case of services? Within 60 days. Okay. Within 30 days, sorry. So in case of supply of services, you have to issue invoice within 30 days or 45 days for insurance, banking, and financial institutions. Normally it is at least 30 days. If you issue this invoice within this time limit, then the date of issue of invoice or the receipt, whichever is earlier. Now receipt is bifurcated as date of recording the payments in the books of accounts or date on which payment is credited to your bank, whichever is earlier. Okay. Then in case supply of services is invoice is not issued within time, then the date of provision of service or receipt, whichever is earlier. Date invoice is issued on time, date of issue of invoice or receipt of payment. But if it is invoice is delayed, then date of provision of service or actual receipt, whichever is earlier. Now in this case, even if the above events are not ascertainable, then they said, okay, time of supply is date of receipt of service in the books of accounts of the recipient of supply. Okay. Then the time of supply under reverse charge will be the date of recording the payment in the books of accounts of the recipient of service, date of recording the payments in the books of accounts, or date of 61st day. In case of forward charge, it was 30 days. In case of reverse charge, date of payment or 61st day from the suppliers involved, whichever is earlier. Even in this case, if it is not ascertainable, date of entry in the books of accounts. Then you have a special case of vouchers. Time of supply for vouchers will be date of issue of voucher if the supply is identifiable, same like goods. If it is not identifiable, then the date of redemption. If voucher is not utilized, what happens? If you have issued a voucher and it is an ascertainable voucher, okay, it means you know what it is going to be redeemed against, then the time of supply will be issue of voucher. You have to pay GST on that. Whether it is redeemed, whether it is utilized or no, doesn't matter. आपको तो GST pay करना ही है. But if it is an unascertainable voucher, then you are saved because you will pay the GST only when you redeem it. And if it is not redeemed, no GST will be payable. Okay, Paranam? What is the difference between voucher and invoice? Invoice is actual transaction of supply which is made and you're giving the invoice for this. But voucher, it can be redeemed by any way. It's like a advance payment. It's an advance payment for, it could be for ascertained goods or not ascertained good. Voucher, you can exchange it. Like you go to any malls, you'll find a gift voucher wherein you're paying some money in advance, you're taking the voucher. And you could either redeem yourself or you could give it to anyone. Now, this voucher is equivalent to a cash transaction. Now, government has said if you issue vouchers also and you know what is it's going to get redeemed, then pay GST at that point of time. But if it's a general voucher for which you don't know what it will get, it's going to get redeemed for, then don't pay GST now. Pay GST when it is actually redeemed against a particular goods. Okay. If there's any penalty for late issuance of invoice, yeah, there is a general penalty because if you don't follow any provision of the law, then there is a penalty of 10,000 rupees, wherein you're not following the provisions of the law. Fine, that penalty will come in. And then in case of residual cases, what you have seen, if all the above do not work for a situation, then the time of supply will be where a periodical return is to be filed, the due date of such a return, or in any other case, the date on which tax is paid. Okay, where a periodical return is to be filed, then the due date of such return, in any other case, the date on which tax is paid, that becomes the time of supply. Addition in value by way of interest, late fees or penalty, IPL, interest, penalty or late fees. For delayed payment of consideration for services, the time of supply will be the date on which supplier receives the addition in value. So actual receipt of value will be the time of supply in case of this IPL charges. Clear till now? Very short chapter, but you'll have to remember the sequence. Once you read it through, you will understand because there is not much of a technical things over here, not much to remember like how we had in exemptions chapter. Okay, so we'll get into MCQs so that if you have any questions during the MCQs also, you could ask. Messrs. Positive Advisors Private Limited provided vouchers to its employees worth rupees 5,000 on 29th of October 2021 on the occasion of its 8th anniversary, which is on 28th October 2021. Now, the voucher value can be used either for purchase of goods or purchase of services. Voucher can be redeemed anytime. Few of the employees redeemed the voucher on 26 June 2022. What is the time of supply? Correct, Anish. IPL is paid for FCM, RCM. IPL is generally paid for FCM because on forward charge only you will collect late fees. In case of RCM, the supplier will collect from you. On that, there's no clarification. But on forward charge, when you collect interest, penalty, or late fees, so on that you have to pay GST. Of course, there is an exemption on interest received, so you don't have to pay GST on that portion. Okay, there are a lot of conflicting answers which I'm getting. Few are saying it is 29th October. On what basis have you said 29th October? Because it is provided vouchers on 29th October. Okay, they have issued vouchers, but this voucher can be redeemed against goods or services. It is not only against one item which it will be redeemed for. So 29th October cannot be the answer. What about 28th October? It is only the occasion. So B can never be an answer because it's just an occasion of 28th October. There's no event link there. So 28th October, nobody has given answer. That's right. 26th June is when it is actually redeemed, right? So it is actually redeemed on 26th June. So the answer is 26th June in this case, right? Some people are saying D. D can't be the case because there's no requirement of any 30 days or time limit. In case of voucher, it is redemption of voucher. Since they've redeemed on 26th June, that is the time of supply for this voucher. Okay. Question number 2, which of the following is the time of supply in case of supply of goods where reverse charge mechanism is applicable? Date of receipt of the goods or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Date of receipt of goods or date immediately following 30 days from the date of issue of invoice, whichever is earlier. Or is it C, date of receipt of goods, date immediately following 60 days from the date of issue of invoice, or date of payment, whichever is earlier? Or is it D, date of receipt of the goods or date immediately following 30 days from the date of invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier? Like Petladwala, if it is medical, like in voucher, it is mentioned that for clothing, then it will be the date of issue of voucher. D, if you are saying C, oh, if you are saying B also, well, luckily somebody said A also, so all options are exhausted. It can't be E in case of supply of goods under reverse charge basis. It is 30 days. So 30 days or date of receipt of goods or date of payment, whichever is earlier. So it will be date of receipt of the goods or 30 days from the date of invoice or the date of payment, whichever is earlier. So in case of goods, there are three conditions. Okay, 30 days and date of receipt or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Ms. Gomati provided professional services to Mr. Dinesh on 29th May 2022. Invoice is issued on 28th June 2022. Payment is received on 1st of July 2022. What is the time of supply in this case? Is it 29th May 22, which is provision of service, or is it issue of invoice on the 28th June, or is it 1st of July receipt of payment, or is it 30th June? Invoice for supply of services, we know very well that it should be issued within a particular point of time. If it is issued within this particular point of time, then it's fine. Otherwise, it will go back to provision of service. Now, provision of service on the 29th May, and invoice is issued on the 28th June, which is issued within 30 days. Since it is issued within 30 days, then it will be date of issue of invoice or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. So 28th June 22 or this one, whichever is earlier. 20th June is the earliest date. So time of supply, most of you has given correct answer is 28th June. Right. Fourth question, which of the following is time of supply in case of supply of services where reverse charge mechanism is applicable? Is it date immediately following 30 days from the date of invoice, or date immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice, or the date of payment, whichever is earlier? Is it date of payment or date immediately following 30 days from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier? Is it date of payment or date immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier? Or is it date immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice or 60 days from the date of payment, whichever is earlier? Very confusing. Read it carefully. When calculating date is the date when services provided and date when invoice generated included. 30 days from the date of issue, date of provision of services. So provision of services we will not include, but the date of issue of invoice needs to be included. Okay, under reverse charge for services, it is not A. Definitely it is not B, because 60 days is the criteria. So date of payment or date immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice, whichever is earlier, because date of actual receipt of goods is not there in this case. So date of payment or date immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice. Under reverse charge for services, it is 60 days or the date of payment, whichever is earlier. Okay. No D, no A. Very few people, I would say, have given the correct answer. Yeah, most 50% have given the correct answer. Question number 5. Mr. Karthik provided services to Mr. Gautam on 12th of January 2022. Invoice is issued on 15th of February 2022 and date of payment is 22nd March. What is the time of supply in this case? Be careful in question number 4 and 5. Okay, there is a very significant change in facts. Right. So the time of supply will be, in this case, if invoice is issued on time, fine. What is the time to issue invoice? From the provision of service, 30 days. So provision of service on 12th January, invoice should have been issued within 10th of February, but it is because 30 days, January has 31 days, right? So it should be issued within 10th of January, but in this 10th of February, but it is issued 15th of February. So time of supply will be date of provision of service or receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. So either 12th January 22 or 22nd March, whichever is earlier. 12th January is earliest. So correct answer is C. Okay. Great. So those were the questions on time of supply. If you have any questions, you could ask. Otherwise, the next class, I don't want to start value of supply now and keep it half-ended. So value of supply we'll discuss in the next class. Just take 5 minutes. We'll wrap up the class early today because this was a very simple and short chapter. So let's keep it short and simple. Let me know if you have any questions here. Please explain MCQ 5 again. See, the question is provision of service is on 12th January and invoice is issued on 15th February. Invoice should be issued within 30 days of provision of service. Provision of service is 12th January. 12th January to 11th January makes it 31 days. Correct? 31 days because January has 31 days. आप count करके भी देख लीजिए. 31 minus 12, how much is it? 17. 17. 18, sorry. 18 plus you have 12 days there. 18, sorry. 19 days in January and 11 days in February. So invoice on the 11th February makes it as 31 days. So it should have issued within 30 days, which means within 10th February invoice should have been issued, but it is issued on 15th February, which is issued after 30 days of provision of service. If the invoice is issued after the due date of raising of invoice, then the time of supply is actual provision of service or receipt of money, whichever is earlier. So provision of service is 12th January. So 12th January is earlier than the receipt of payment. So 12th January will be the time of supply. Understood, Khushi? 12th Jan कैसे हुआ? 12th Jan इस तरह हुआ, कविता जी. Did you understand? Correct answer is C or D. It is C, not D. C is the answer. Please explain one more time. Continuous supply of goods. Okay. Continuous supply of goods is defined. We'll go to the definition, so it's very simple to understand. Continuous supply of goods means a supply of goods which is provided or agreed to be provided on a continuous or recurrent basis under a contract, whether or not by means of, so it could be by any of these means or just supplying on a regular basis through a wire, cable, pipeline, or a conduit. Like if you have a best example is you have a pipeline between a petrol fuel to a flight company. They're saying that keep your company, I need the fuel for my flight on a regular basis. So from the petrol company, I'll have a pipeline. It is a continuous supply of goods. Anyways, on petroleum products, there is no GST, but assume any other fuel on which GST is there, on if it's a continuous supply, then it becomes a continuous supply of goods, wherein the supplier invoice the recipient on a regular or periodic basis and include supply of such goods as the government may suggest. So if this is a continuous supply on which timely, periodically, I'm raising an invoice, then the time of issue of invoice will be on the periodic invoice when I have to generate. That becomes the time of supply. Okay, Anish? It could be gas supply. On LPG gas, GST is there, right? So on gas supply could be another example. Thanks, Mitesh. That's a good example. Please update all earlier charge and note that have been used by you. Sure, definitely I'll do that. Please explain agent receiving the goods, whether will be treated as recipient or the principal will be treated as recipient. So if an agent is receiving on behalf of the principal, it will be treated that the principal itself has received the goods. So agent acting on behalf of the principal will also be treated as a recipient because the ultimate recipient will be the principal itself. Nikita, RCM, what do you want? RCM we understood in the previous chapter. Are you asking for RCM for goods or RCM for services? With this MCQs, I think it is clear. But let me know what is your specific doubt. Notes and PPT for chapter 4, I'll just update it today itself. Full form of RCM, reverse charge mechanism. Do non-profit organizations also pay GST? If they provide taxable services, then they pay under GST, otherwise not. Okay, thank you very much.